We are being asked to celebrate America's 250th anniversary, even though America today is everything our founding fathers desperately hoped it would never become. Leading the celebration is a toxic narcissist, motormouth liar, unrepentant womanizer, convicted sexual molester, and convicted serial felon, who is duly elected as President of the United States, not once, but twice. He is joined by multitudes of toady followers sworn to fulfill his every whim, irrespective of what the American people need and want. Applauding from the sidelines are the richest 1% of Americans, owners of key members of every branch of government, along with nearly 1/3 of America's wealth. An insatiable, ever-grasping horde who fancy themselves rulers of the world, every one of them dead from the neck up. Average Americans are celebrating, too, not realizing that they don't belong, that their government, the government of the people, by the people, and for the people, has long ceased to exist, as have an ever-increasing number of their precious liberties. How did we arrive at this state? There are many who will tell you that all this and more are to be expected. After all, democracies have been rare and short-lived since civilization began. Democracy in ancient Greece persisted only 200 years. By that measure, America's downfall is 50 years overdue. It doesn't matter who you vote for. America is crumbling. Total collapse is only a matter of time. It is easy to be cynical, but I believe there are solid reasons for hope, and not merely for the next 250 years. The reasons relate to a breakthrough in psychological understanding made by my friend and mentor, the late Dr. Joseph Weiss. His psychological findings are detailed in the book How Psychotherapy Works. Weiss's insights were validated by many years of empirical research described in the book The Psychoanalytic Process, Theory, Clinical Observation, and Empirical Research. Originally trained as a theoretical physicist, I switched to psychology in my youth and have been associated with his San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group for more than 25 years. People seek psychotherapy because they cannot achieve important aspirations for a better life on their own. According to Weiss, the barriers they confront arise from false unconscious beliefs they developed about themselves and life in general as the result of personal experience and cultural indoctrination. He called such beliefs pathogenic because they arrest personal development, thereby preventing people from reaching for their goals. Pathogenic beliefs are always mistaken habits of belief, which is why they can be corrected and why there is hope for us all, and hope for America over the next 250 years. When I became associated with Joe's research group, I was struck by how inevitable it is that people develop crippling pathogenic beliefs. The few who seek psychotherapy are often not extraordinarily impaired. The pathogenic beliefs that trouble them trouble most people too. The only difference is that they have somehow found the courage to surmount them. It became clear to me that genetic programming must predispose all of us to form these paralyzing beliefs. As it turned out, understanding the genetic underpinnings of pathogenic beliefs was merely a matter of reading Weiss's theory between the lines. My familiarity with Joe's theory caused me to look for obstructive genetic programming whenever unrealized human aspirations were involved. Uncovering the programming that typically prevents people from realizing their full potential as individuals, in widen my inquiry to include the long-standing unrealized aspirations of the human race, finding obstructive programming there too. It became clear that the basic problem is that our genetic programming is ill-equipped to meet the demands of civilized life. Genetic testing has shown that we have essentially the same DNA as our Stone Age ancestors, which means that we are perfectly suited to hunting and gathering in hostile environments as self-sufficient, family-centered bands. But that's it. Opting for any civilized lifestyle has proven to be a stretch. The history of civilization shows that whenever man reaches beyond mere survival toward a fulfilling, many-faceted, civilized lifestyle, he finds that his emotions, thinking processes, and behaviors go out of whack, with the degree of wackiness being in proportion to the departures from Stone Age living. Our Stone Age programming becomes pathogenic because of mismatches between the requirements of civilized life and the conditions our DNA was designed to handle. This is probably not the first time you have heard talk of mismatch between our genetic inheritance and modern life. If you have looked into why so many of us are fatties addicted to junk food, you know the scientific reason is that our Stone Age ancestors were designed to crave the high-fat foods they needed to survive, and that self-control wasn't built into their makeup because the cravings were controlled automatically by a shortage of supply. Because we are genetically the same as our Stone Age ancestors, despite our modern pretensions, we have the same uncontrolled craving for high-calorie, high-fat food, the difference being that the external circumstances that once kept our cravings in check no longer exist. Because high-calorie, fatty foods are cheaply abundant today, the instinct that once served survival by causing us to crave them uncontrollably has now become pathogenic. Today's obesity epidemic being the result. The basic idea is that genetic programming operates behind the scenes much like the Wizard of Oz. Recall the moment in the movie when Dorothy and her friends finally make it to the Emerald City, only to confront a flashing and smoking TV image of the wizard that commands them to go away. Not deterred, they investigate further and find the actual wizard pulling levers that animate the alarming TV image from a little booth backstage. In this analogy, your conscious view corresponds to the TV image, while your Stone Age genes are the wizard secretly manipulating your conscious self without you knowing it. To place all the blame for civilization's shortcomings on man's antiquated Stone Age genes seems simplistic, until you recognize the extent to which genetic predispositions permeate our being. We humans congratulate ourselves for our intelligence, but the good Lord knew exactly how stupid we are, and so designed us to survive instinctively as the other animals do, stating what few intellectual gifts we have for a later time. Well, that time is now. Living instinctively cannot continue. What follows is a story told in several videos about how man's genetic programming served him well initially, became increasingly less adequate as civilization progressed, and has become the most destructive obstacle to every modern aspiration we have, and even our own survival today. This series will detail how Ancient genetic programming now subverts everyone's deepest aspirations at every turn, as individuals, as societies, as nations, and as the family of man. Americans like to think of ourselves as independent, free spirits, with many of us going so far as to imagine we are the individualists who share a kinship with the cowboys of the Old West. That would be true, of course, if our Stone Age ancestors had been loners who raced across the savannas of Africa as solitary explorers. But this is who our ancestors actually were. Like all humans who have ever lived, our Stone Age hunter-gathering ancestors braved the terrors of the wild as lifelong members of tightly knit groups. Underlying their cohesiveness was genetic programming that led them to intertwine their lives from an early age. Group solidarity greatly increased their survival chances of all by causing group members to think and act as one, thereby motivating ready cooperation, empathetic understanding, and individual self-sacrifice for the good of all. Group solidarity provides many positive benefits today as well. Governments, societies, corporations, religions, and even sports teams couldn't function without it. Civilization itself depends on it. But there are problems too, especially in a world that is as complex, diverse, and interconnected as ours. These problems occur when genes responsible for group solidarity inhibit individuals from standing up for what they know is right upon finding themselves in groups that hold contrary views. In the 1950s, social psychologist Solomon Asch conducted experiments aimed at testing whether people would change their judgments to match group opinion, even when doing so meant denying the evidence presented to them by their own eyes. In the experiment, subjects were asked to join groups of people like themselves and voice their judgments about the lengths of lines shown on the screen. Each presentation involved a line on the left and 3 lines on the right. Group members were asked to say which right-hand line was the same length as the left-hand line. The answer was always obvious. Unbeknownst to the subjects, however, other group members were hired Confederates who had been told to give wrong answers on many trials. The experiment began with everyone making correct judgments, but on the 3rd trial, after the subject had become comfortable as a new member of the group, all of the Confederates started giving the same wrong answer. On 37% of such occasions, group unanimity caused subjects to deny the evidence of their own eyes and yield to group pressure by stating the group's wrong answers. In interviews afterwards, subjects gave different reasons for yielding to the group. The judgments of some subjects had become so distorted by group pressure that they believed they had given accurate answers in every case. They were genuinely convinced that the group was always right. Others said they knew the group was wrong but did not want to make waves. Asch's results showed that 63% of subjects resisted group pressure, which is not as reassuring as it may seem because the evidence that the group was wrong was always absolutely beyond question. In real-life group situations, the evidence is rarely so clear-cut. Also, in real life, groups are much more cohesive than in Asch's experiments because group members enjoy relationships with one another and with the leader they are expected to follow. Our genes place us between a rock and a hard place. The problem can be seen from the motto, "There is no I in team." You cannot have a cohesive group made up of free-thinking individuals. The more cohesive the group, the more repressed each individual in the group must become. It's called groupthink. We're designed genetically so that the more we desire group harmony and consensus, the less able we are to engage in individualistic critical thinking. When members of a cohesive group prioritize agreement and conformity over critical evaluations of alternative perspectives, individuals will automatically tend to suppress doubts, avoid raising controversial issues, self-censor to maintain group cohesion, and react negatively to those voicing dissenting opinions, no matter the facts at hand, often leading to irrational or at least flawed group decisions. None of that matters much when the issue to be decided is whether the family will go bowling or to a movie on a Saturday night. But it matters a great deal when the stakes are high and people's lives are in the balance. The example that immediately comes to mind is the Challenger space shuttle disaster on January 28, 1986. The shuttle exploded because two rubber O-rings failed to seal the joint between two lower segments of one of the Challenger's solid fuel booster rockets, opening a path for extremely hot gases to escape and immediately caused the booster's base to swivel into an external fuel tank carrying liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, leading the tank to collapse and explode. Soon killed were the 7 Challenger crew members, including the first civilian astronaut, a school teacher by the name of Krista Corrigan McAuliffe, who was included as a publicity stunt. She was scheduled to conduct at least 2 lessons from orbit to school children in their classrooms, and then spend the following 9 months lecturing students across the United States to interest them in high-tech careers. The lessons from space were one of the reasons NASA resisted delaying the launch because of weather, as the schedule would then have her conduct classes on the weekend when no students were in school. When the explosion occurred, everyone at NASA and booster rocket maker Morton Thiokol knew exactly what must have gone wrong. Concerns with the O-rings began in the late 1970s because the O-rings routinely failed to one degree or another during launches and were especially prone to fail when Florida weather turned cool. A year previously, a particularly bad failure involving releases of hot gases occurred when the temperature had dipped to 53 degrees. The temperature had, the night before the launch, had plunged into the 20s, leaving the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center buried in thick ice. That caused 5 Thiokol engineers to meet hastily to develop a presentation showing that such cold weather could cause the O-rings to fail catastrophically, and to recommend delaying the launch until temperatures rose above at least 53 degrees. Initially, groupthink solidarity with their engineers led Thiokol executives to agree to advise NASA not to proceed. NASA was Thiokol's biggest customer. Thiokol executives had to maintain good relations with NASA executives too, who were dead set on launching the next day, come hell or high water. In the end, Thiokol executives meekly recommended the 53-degree delay without the detailed dog and pony show their engineers had put together, because NASA executives were clearly in no mood to hear again about those damn O-rings. Launches were always successful despite O-ring failures. NASA management decided to delay the launch until the last bit of ice had melted. The schedule launched when the temperature was only 39 degrees. Later, a government inquiry found the decision to move ahead with the questionable O-rings technically followed NASA's protocols. There was no organizational misconduct, no rules were broken, no one lied or falsified records. Groupthink had been written into NASA's protocols, which were based on the erroneous group assumption that the vehicle could survive any O-ring failures. The good guys in this story are the Morton Thiokol engineers who based their correct conclusions solely on the facts, which might give you the idea that scientists and engineers are immune to erroneous decisions based on groupthink. But nothing could be farther from the truth. Groupthink is fundamental to the way science is done. It's called the peer review process, which in the final analysis is a good thing, but often means in practice that the group-thinking old guard are positioned to oppose any attempt to bring new facts or new ways of thinking to light by suppressing publication of the advances and seeing to it that the innovators have difficulty receiving further research funds. In science, facts eventually win out, but decades may go by before that happens, and in the meantime, the innovators may be stigmatized as crackpots or troublemakers, may even lose their jobs. The physicist Max Planck only slightly exaggerated when he said, "A new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents, but because its opponents eventually die, and a new generation grows up familiar with it." Groupthink is much more important to religious congregations because members are usually asked to believe things that defy common sense, which is impossible without a heavy reliance on groupthink unanimity among the congregation's members and their leader. That makes congregational orthodoxy extremely resistant to change, leaving progressive members no recourse except to switch to a group more of their liking or start a new congregation of their own. Religious splintering explains why there are more than 200 Christian denominations in the United States and more than 45,000 Christian denominations worldwide, and why such splintering is seen in all major religions. Many Christians today see God as a kind of personal being, a superhuman in the sky who looks somewhat like us, has emotions much as we do, and is usually male, old, and all-powerful. Other Christians, though, maintain that picturing God as being an old fart in the sky is blasphemous, that this understanding of God amounts to creating God in our own image and likeness. According to these Christians, God is so far beyond what we can think of or imagine that we can't even say anything about it. Still other Christians see God as an impersonal life force. that lies beyond all that lives in the universe. These beliefs about God are mutually exclusive, yet they are held by people who call themselves Christian, thanks to groupthink in each case. Other differences can be found in what today's Christians believe about Jesus' resurrection. Some Christians insist that Jesus physically rose from the dead and that this real physical resurrection was essential for salvation. Other Christians think that the resurrection should not be understood literally, that the resurrection of Jesus is not about his body becoming reanimated. For them, the resurrection is a symbolic claim that what Jesus lived for lives on forever in the lives of his followers who keep him alive by imitating him. Christian beliefs about hell vary as well. Many Christians believe in a hell that is a place of eternal torment reserved for those who habitually sin. However, other Christians maintain that hell is not a literal place, but a metaphor for lives lived apart from God in the here and now. Christian churches differ in their understanding of Christian practices as well, particularly baptism and the Eucharist. To some Christians, baptism is the rite that removes an infant's original sin. Others maintain that baptism does not remove original sin, but is a symbolic act that brings Christians into a covenant with God. Still others maintain that baptism should not be given to infants at all, that it should be reserved for adults. So in Baptist churches, for example, baptism for adults is seen as the outward sign of the internal spiritual cleansing that a person undergoes upon being born again. The Eucharist, or communion, also means different things in different churches. Catholics believe that when they partake of communion, they are literally eating the body and blood of Christ that have been mysteriously transformed from bread and wine during the Mass. Other Christians insist that taking communion is a symbolic act, that it is a symbolic meal that commemorates Jesus' Last Supper. Christians have widely different views about what sacred scriptures are and mean too. Different Christian groups use different scriptures. Most Christian groups use both the Old and New Testament, but a surprisingly large number of American churches almost completely ignore the Old Testament, thinking that that part of Scripture has been superseded by the New Testament. So, believers in these churches may read the Old Testament, but largely see it as irrelevant. Other groups think that the Old Testament continues to be relevant and has to be followed. Some Christian groups have more books in their canon than just the Old and New Testament. Some churches include the Old Testament Apocrypha, while other Christians have other sacred books, such as the Mormons, who have the Book of Mormon. Some Christians have books that many people in America have never even heard of. The Ethiopic Church, for example, includes in the New Testament the ancient book called the Didaskalia Apostolorum, which is not included in the canon of most Protestant denominations. Not only do the contents of scriptures differ from one Christian church to another, how these scriptures are understood differs from one church to another too. There are Christians who maintain that the scriptures contain the literal and precise words of God, that these inspired words need to be accepted and believed if one is to go to heaven. Other Christians maintain that the Bible is a very human book, loaded with spiritual insight, but also filled with human opinions and errors. Christians who think that the Bible is inspired differ about what exactly is inspired. There are Christians who maintain that the English translation of the King James Bible is the one inspired Bible. Other Christian denominations think that their own translation, for example, the New World Translation of the Jehovah's Witnesses, is the inspired version. And so it goes. Clearly, the term Orthodox Christian means nothing whatsoever. Scientists rely on established scientific data to keep their theories from straying too far from scientific truth. Theoretically, Christians have the equivalent touchstone to theological truth in Jesus' New Testament teachings about the paramount importance of universal, non-judgmental love. However, denominational splintering has caused Christian congregations to greatly vary as to the place of Jesus' teachings in the brand of theology they practice. There are Christian congregations who go so far as to actively oppose this, the main thrust of Jesus' ministry, who portray Jesus as weak and effeminate in books and sermons decrying empathy. These MAGA, Jesus-belittling evangelical Protestants base their Christian nationalist movement on a rejection of most things Jesus stood for, yet remain Christian in name nevertheless. Logical consistency vanishes when groupthink takes over. There are other Christians who don't brashly criticize Jesus' ministry verbally, but who adamantly oppose his teachings as applied to public policies inspired by them. These so-called conservative Christians voted for Donald Trump in good measure because he promised to end democratic welfare policies Jesus would certainly have advocated as a way of aiding American families in need. These Christians labeled Democrats supporting such measures as woke liberals during the 2024 election campaign, spitting out the phrase with venom every time they used it, even though Jesus was obviously himself a woke liberal when it came to social policy. In many cases, the bedrock of the MAGA Jesus-belittling approach to Christian theology involves a focus on the Old Testament and the insistence that everything in the Bible is the literal Word of God, evidently except what Jesus taught. Again, a lack of logical consistency is the hallmark of groupthink opinion. Scriptural literalism first came under scholarly attack in the 17th century, as one scientific discovery after another pointed up flaws in literalism as an approach to understanding God. The greatest scientists of the day, including Galileo Galilei, Johannes Kepler, René Descartes, and Isaac Newton, locked horns with Christian literalists of every stripe as their new scientific method of studying nature with mathematical precision revealed an ever-increasing number of nature's secrets. Being religiously devout, the scientists took their success as evidence that they had hit upon a means of discerning God's plan for the entire universe, as revealed by the natural laws they were discovering. The laws of nature gave no evidence of the type of deities portrayed in ancient scriptures, including the Bible. Intense scholarly scrutiny has since revealed the Bible to be an anthology of books written centuries apart, having different authors expressing different viewpoints, some smacking of divine influence and others not. Morally speaking, the Bible is a mixed bag, with believers constructing moralities of their own making by picking and choosing among the Bible's passages. All Christian denominations pick and choose whether they admit to doing so or not. Rigorous scholarship has shown that the God portrayed in the historical books of the Old Testament that describe the Hebrew quest for a promised land is a mythical God cut from the same cloth as the mythical gods associated with the Mesopotamian city-states, Egypt, Rome, Greece, and other cultures stretching all the way back to Stone Age times. Not unlike the legions of other ancient mythical gods then imagined to exist across the globe, the mythical God of ancient Israel was a petty, petulant, needy, partisan, amoral deity that bears no resemblance to the true God of universal love, who created the entire universe in all of its glory, and whose love embraces all of the creatures it brought into being. If early Christian fathers hadn't decided to include antiquated Hebrew scriptures in the Christian Bible, Christians today would give no more thought to biblical Yahweh than they do to Baal, Marduk, Nana, Isis, Thor, Jupiter, or Zeus. Am I saying that the Bible is not at all divinely inspired? By no means. As I say, all ancient cultures did this sort of thing. The compilers of the books of the Old Testament apparently had a no legend left behind policy, because they typically stitched together all available legends on a given topic, including legends that contradicted one another. So Genesis contains two contradictory accounts of the creation. The book of Joshua contains multiple conflicting accounts of Joshua pillaging all of the Canaanites, and one version in which God chastises Joshua for having not pillaged all of the Canaanite lands, and so on. The mythical God of ancient Israel is a comic book character of the true God, and is the Old Testament, as is the Old Testament's portrayal of God's manner of relating to humanity. Confusion on these points is the reason the Bible is one of the most morally perplexing books ever written. That's why angels and devils can both find justifications for their actions in its pages. So if you want to read the Bible, go ahead, but cherry pick what you read. And if you're a Christian, read it like a Christian, not like some make-believe Israelite. Focus on Jesus' moral message of universal, non-judgmental love in the New Testament, and only those parts of the Old Testament that are consistent with it. The Promised Land stories of the Old Testament are folk legends parading as God's literal truth. Legends that have inspired unscrupulous people down through history to insert themselves into the biblical narratives as God's chosen people, having God's seal of approval for whatever outrages they wish to commit. By identifying with the biblical Israelites, these people claim the right to plunder in the manner of invading Israelite armies of old. Never mind that archaeological and anthropological evidence has debunked the stories about Israelites robbing and murdering Canaanites and others by the thousand with God's approval and support. All these people care about is clothing their atrocities in the mantle of God's righteousness, and literal interpretations of the biblical stories provide that. So as the world stands by, cowed by unfounded religious justifications, these pillagers continue their work of benefiting from the destruction of Palestinian lives. America has its want-to-be Israelites too. They are, of course, the MAGA, Jesus-belittling, evangelical Protestants I've been talking about. The self-proclaimed warriors of God who see themselves as having license to ignore everything Jesus taught about universal non-judgmental love, and to do so hypocritically in Jesus' name. You know them as the people most responsible for elevating a pathological liar, convicted sexual molester, and serial felon to the presidency of the United States. They did so on the promise that political gratitude would catapult them to the corridors of power, positioning them to voice their unschooled and utterly simple-minded form of religiosity onto an unsuspecting American public through the force of law. The MAGA, Jesus-belittling evangelical Protestants won the propaganda war of the 2024 election campaign by painting themselves as God's moral darlings, doing battle against the forces of godless secularism, hell-bent on destroying the American family and everything else America holds dear. In actuality, they are the people Jesus warned us about, the false prophets who don sheep's clothing to hide their actual intentions. The election was a contest between those who stood in solidarity with Jesus' teachings through their welfare policies and those who actively opposed Jesus' teachings. The Democrats held the moral high ground the whole time and stupidly squandered their advantage. The Democrats held the political high ground too. America was founded on two lofty principles: that all men are created equal in their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that the government of the United States has no higher purpose than to see to it that infringements of those rights do not occur. That's it. Those founding principles are everything that has made America unique. It turns out that the only way to guarantee that government would remain committed to equal rights for all in a nation as diverse as ours, where the consent of the governed rules, is if Jesus' teaching about universal non-judgmental love itself governs everyone. America's founding principles and Jesus' teaching are inseparably intertwined. By belittling Jesus, Trump and his MAGA evangelical Protestant toadies attacked America's foundations too, and the Democrats let them get away with it. America rose to untold heights by standing on the shoulders of pipsqueaks, innumerable, nameless, penniless nobodies who flocked to its shores in the hope that here at last was a place that would give them the opportunity to show the world what the downtrodden, discarded, and dispossessed can do with half a chance. Being dirt poor, they pursued one get-rich-quick scheme after another until America's wealth became the envy of the world. America remains wealthy, but is envied no longer, because we, and those before us failed to live up to America's founding principles in our rush for personal wealth. Living up to those principles proved to be challenging right from the start because the governed, mainly the Jesus-belittling Christians of several states, lobbied governments at every level to sanction their determination to profit by holding other humans in unspeakable bondage. Down through the years, similar violations of equal rights have occurred against women, specific nationalities, migrants from specific countries, migrants in general, American Indians, farmers, factory workers, the uneducated, the poor, small children. The list goes on. And in each case, the violations were founded on the same disregard for Jesus' teachings. The goal of the American Revolution was nothing less than to rewrite human history. As Thomas Paine put it, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. The birthday of a new world is at hand. Well, that didn't happen. It didn't happen because Americans ignored what a pipsqueak from Nazareth had to say. The 2024 election campaign was won thanks to groupthink tactics based on Stone Age genetics, tactics that will prove successful in the future unless Americans understand how they have been suckered. The first role in groupthink politics is to make the election not about facts, not about reality, but about warring partisan groups doing battle on a public stage. Make the election about that, and people will stop thinking about what's best for their lives and those of their children in the long run. For years, Trump shamelessly wooed the Jesus-belittling Christians until groupthink coalesced around accepting him as their chief spokesperson. From then on, he could lie without hesitation, trusting that groupthink would sustain group loyalty no matter what he said. He could even go so far as to claim that subhuman Haitian immigrants were eating people's cats and dogs in Ohio, and his supporters would accept it and repeat it as gospel. It didn't matter that the Republican mayor of the town quickly denied the lie, because Trump kept hammering away, doubling down on the lie, tripling down on the line, quadrupling down on the line, till even unaffiliated voters started to believe there might be something to it. I talked to a group supporter at a party who, out of loyalty to Trump, started spreading an outrageous lie of his own. He claimed that illegal aliens dressed in $1,000 coats were begging for money at a local shopping mall. The implausibility of people dressed as rock stars begging for nickels and dimes never crossed his mind. Such is the power of groupthink loyalty. Early in the campaign, news organizations tried to fact-check Trump's lies, but quickly stopped. Because one, they couldn't keep up with the sheer volume, and two, nobody gave a damn. Opponents didn't need the fact-checking, and supporters immediately dismissed it, having been brainwashed to chant fake news whenever Trump was criticized. Nothing stops people from thinking more effectively than lies based on Stone Age hot-button issues, such as outsiders think we are weak. The opposition is letting people murder our babies and undermine our families. Hordes of subhumans are invading our land, using up our resources, stealing our jobs, and taking food from our babies' mouths. Being an accomplished liar, Trump kept repeating Stone Age hot-button lies throughout the campaign until supporters and many unaffiliated voters could think of nothing else. All the while, the Democrats stupidly droned on repeating statistics to a populace that had been bludgeoned into an unthinking state. The Jesus-belittling Christians now in power in the Trump administration are not bad people. I temporarily become a Jesus-belittling Christian whenever someone cuts me off on the highway or pokes along in his car, preventing me from making a light. My family consisted entirely of Jesus-belittling Christians. They all would have voted for Trump had they lived. I count Jesus-belittling Christians among my friends, too. They are all decent people who love their country and rightfully fear God. Following Jesus' teachings is hard, and the reason is that it violates Stone Age genetics. Humans are natural-born, mean-spirited bigots under the right circumstances. Jesus-belittling Christians are decent folks who have let their Stone Age genes turn them into hypocrites who praises Jesus at the drop of a hat and engage in other self-deceptive, sanctimonious theatrics while their elected junkyard dog attacks the enemies Jesus commanded them to love. If you want to learn more about Trump and his MAGA Jesus-belittling Christian minions, read your Bible and start with the book of Amos. Hospitals, orphanages, and nursing homes for the needy of all faiths came into being in the 4th century for the first time in human history, as did charities providing aid to those who suffered from natural disasters, poverty, homelessness, and hunger, thanks to Christians inspired by Jesus' emphasis on universal, non-judgmental love. To see how far Trump's MAGA, Jesus-belittling Christian administration has taken us, type biggest winners and biggest losers in Trump's big, beautiful tax bill into your favorite search engine. Doing that will show that the biggest winners in the 2025 bill were the rich and corporations of various types, followed by, at a considerable distance, by seniors and middle-class families. Everyone got something except the poor. They'll pay for the tax breaks Trump and his Jesus-belittling evangelical Protestants made historical cuts to social programs such that millions of the poorest Americans lost medical coverage and food stamp aid. Any other big losers? Oh yes, your children and children's children. The bill is projected to add $4 trillion to the national debt they will have to pay. And that's only the beginning. Listen to that clown.
This prayer was recited by Sandy 1, which is one of the Sandys, to all Sandys, all those A-10 crews, prior to all CSAR missions, but especially this CSAR mission that happened in real time. They call it CSAR 25:17, which I think is meant to reflect Ezekiel 25:17. So the prayer is CSAR 25:17, and it reads, and pray with me, please. The path of the downed aviator is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who, in the name of camaraderie and duty, shepherd the lost through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to capture and destroy my brother. And you will know my call sign is Sandy 1, when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
You read the Bible, Greg?
Yes.
Well, there's this passage I got memorized. Sort of fits this occasion. Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Did you know that Trump recently named the Defense Department the Department of War, making this yo-yo Secretary of War? Sounds ominous, doesn't it? This know-nothing religious zealot sees himself as being on a Christian crusade in the manner of the Crusades of old. Hegseth actually fancies himself a Christian crusader. The Crusades of the Middle Ages were about plunder and power, and everything else was a sham, having nothing to do with God. Hegseth is either ignorant of that, or he knows it full well and is trying to con you to get your children behind a gun. I don't care that the Catholic Church promoted the original Crusades. The Christian Crusades were wrong then, and they are wrong now. Show me in sacred scripture where it says God repudiated Jesus, that it is okay to kill and maim and pillage now. You won't find it anywhere. It never happened. Therefore, everything that promotes rejecting Jesus' teachings is a lie. Government must be purged of reckless religious zealots before it's too late. What did Jesus say about wolves dressed in sheep's clothing? By their fruits you will know them.